Robert Kegan wrote about years ago how, he would work with parents who were horrified that they were in a place like, Boulder or the Bay, and they had moved to someplace like Texas or Arkansas. An 8-year-old little Johnny would go from being just full of these wonderful postmodern ideas of equality to being a little racist, right? They
That's
couldn't
right.
figure out what happened. And his
Yeah.
whole thing was, little Johnny doesn't hold your postmodern values of equality in anything approaching a postmodern view of equality. He holds them in a completely rule-based, absolute way. And he would metaphorically burn someone at the cross for not being kind and equitable. So if we look at something that I've spoken about a lot, like, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we talk about this idea of, okay, from a 3.0 expert stage, they're going to see that, okay, we need to have these external systems that ensure that people are being equitable. And if we see any injustice in the world as far as unequal representation of, say, women in the workforce or people of color or people of different gender backgrounds, the cause has to be oppression. And we need to do whatever means is necessary to get equal representation. So they're going to be looking at it through a lens that is not terribly sophisticated and perhaps quite inaccurate.
So 3.0 and 3.5 are going to start caring about human rights. But there's more of a focus on the exteriors, such as the physical gender, right? So
What you can see with your senses.
what you can see with your gender. So there's a conflation of sex and gender. So what they're really seeing is the sex, the biological body. Men should be treated equally as women and vice versa. So basically the color of your skin, everybody should be treated equally. Once you get into the fourth person perspective, there becomes more nuance and a pluralistic sort of capacity for understanding, well, wait a minute, sex and gender aren't the same thing. You
Right.
can have your body biologically be one thing, but then there might be a whole spectrum of genders on the interior that you identify with. And so you're going to start seeing nuances in terms of understanding what quote unquote human rights means.
Right. And when I think you may have mentioned this to me, something about using school children as an example of how they hold some of these things. Say grade school kids, or right. So maybe you could just repeat that, like sort of their understanding of DEI from what would be either a 2.5 amber or probably 3.0
Yeah,
expert or umber phase would look like. Because I think it's
exactly.
important
So
because I think it gets really, this is the content structure fallacy. It gets really confused when we look at the world and see people talking about things. It's like not what they're saying, but from where are they saying it.
exactly. So like, my daughter in middle school, she's surrounded by teachers and family members that have at least a fourth person perspective capacity. So there's a general inclusion of all genders. So as that conversation has become more popular, the school had took that on. And so, on the first day of middle school, the kids were supposed to introduce themselves and their pronouns.
Right.
Right. And so what will happen is there's a kind of gender inclusivity and recognition of spectrum that's coming from the fourth person perspective, 4.0 and 4.5. But then it gets adopted by kids that are more 2.0, 2.5. And so you might see a kid, my daughter was like this, where, now being inclusive is the rule. And if you slip up and accidentally use the wrong pronoun, you're in trouble because you broke
Right.
the rules. And we
Right.
all know. Now, as we move beyond the concrete collective, there now becomes comes an individual, subtle individual that starts to come online that's now able to have some distance, not a lot. 3.0 is fluctuating back and forth, but some distance between understanding this as a rule orientation and maybe I'm starting to find my own ideas, come up with my own ideas about what human rights should look like. That's maybe different than what my postmodern parents and teachers told me.
Right.
it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's so fascinating. I mean, I'm smiling because I'm thinking of Robert Kegan wrote about years ago how, he would work with parents who were horrified that they were in a place like, Boulder or the Bay, and they had moved to someplace like Texas or Arkansas. An 8-year-old little Johnny would go from being just full of these wonderful postmodern ideas of equality to being a little racist, right? They
That's right.
couldn't figure out what happened. And his
Yeah.
whole thing was, little Johnny doesn't hold your postmodern values of equality in anything approaching a postmodern view of equality. He holds them in a completely rule-based, absolute way. And he would metaphorically burn someone at the cross for not being kind and
That's right.
equitable,
That's
right?
right. And so
That's
if
the
we look
irony.
That's right, and if we look at
Mm.
this through Terry's model, likely what happened to this, I think you said Johnny, what likely happened to Johnny is he moves into a new territory. He was owning a 2.5 sort of certainty, and then he went into a new environment, felt a little more insecure. It awakened more of a 2.0, where he's now, instead of being in his mature, I know the rules, I know what we
Right,
are, I know what we believe, he went to an earlier wave where now he is in a newly emerging 2.0 collective. He did it once, but now he has to do it again.
right, right,
And so he's now in this, when we're in an emerging phase, a 0.0, we're usually had by whatever is occurring. And so now he's with all these people and he wants to belong more than anything else. And so he's had by the new rules until he then takes on, okay, now I know the truth. We're not inclusive anymore or whatever it is. Now we believe this other thing.
right, right. Okay, that's very, very helpful. Right, the point 0 versus the point 0.5. Well, and then 4.0 or green is, as many of us have experienced, it is, as you said, they can be had by what they see, in the sense of the capacity, as we acknowledge, I guess there are systemic issues. There is systemic sexism, there is systemic racism, there are systemic injustices. The reality of that is fairly obvious to anyone who sort of looks at the data. And yet the truth is very, very, very complicated, right? Again, as I've spoken about a number of times, but the truth is complicated in that the difference between oppression and naturally chosen differences can be hard to parse out. And one has to be very aware, not just of cognitive bias, but of all kinds of different biases and different projections and different um, presumptions about what may cause differences between people. And what I understand the 4.0 green to be really terrible at is being able, what may be incapable of, but is to being able to appreciate that human reality is created by us creating frameworks of understanding that we then look through, the same way I'm looking through this window right behind my computer.
Mhm.
The window helps define what I see. It's a frame, but if I look through this window, I see something very, very different. It's a different frame.
Yeah.
And is it accurate to say that it's at 4.5 or Teal that the capacity to see and understand that we are in some ways had by our frames begins to come online?
Yeah, so 4.0 recognizes that we're socially constructed and can understand that, 3.5 can understand that I have an observer.
Right.
I can
Right.
reflect on my thoughts and feelings and be like, okay, I'm thinking like this, and that's going to make me act in a certain way, and it's going to get me certain results. So, even 3.5, there's a sense of I can see a kind of a frame. But what 4.5 is able to do is begin to see that these frames are nested along a continuum of development, that some perspectives are better than others in certain contexts. It doesn't
Right.
mean that this perspective is always better than this perspective. It's able to hold the dynamism of shifting contexts.
The relative nature of reality without collapsing into nihilism or deconstruction.
Right. It's able to see that, oh, in this context, a 2.0 perspective is most suited because what you need is for me to just hold your hand and tell you I'm glad you're here.
All right.
Right. Whereas in this other context, let's engage in a 3.5 debate of ideas to support and nurture the sort of living dynamism in this college student who's trying to sort out what they believe and take a position and hold that position and come up with data that supports it. And so that's what 4.5 is able to do. Later in 4.5, they're also able to recognize their own projections upon reflection.
Right. And I want to get to that. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to say 4.0 can recognize when other people are projecting. This is why gaslighting has become such a popular phrase.
Right.
4.5, but they can't recognize it as well when they're doing it.
Well, of course, people don't say like, boy, I really gaslit the shit out of that person the other day. It's like, you don't see a lot of posts about that, right?
Right, exactly.
But the one thing I did notice in integral circles when I first started spending time with them was there was, in some ways, a healthy obsession with projection, because I think noticing our own projection became a newfound reality that you sort of became like, well, wait, Alexander, am I projecting onto you? Can you just, can we reality confirm that? No? Okay, great. I just want to make sure, Well, one of the ways I've tried to understand this and present it hopefully correctly to people is to say that, 3.5 orange, there's a robust understanding of the reality of cognitive bias, which is that, okay, like, I have a bias, and if I'm doing an experiment, I need to have a double blind or triple blind study to make sure that my bias, which I can't control, doesn't muck up the results.
Yeah.
And at 4.0, the next thing I would say it's sort of like, well, okay, there's a cognitive bias, but it's writ large culturally. So there's a subtler cognitive bias where we all have opinions about people of color. We all have opinions about women, and we may internalize those things. And so it might be a group of people of color that are actually acting in a way that is against their own interest on a certain subtle level, because it is this bias that's been programmed on this subtler level. Would that be another way of sort of understanding that in your understanding of the model?
Right. So where 3.5 orange is going to be looking at, to use your words, a cognitive bias, or to be able to really understand my mindset. Like that's a common 3.5 word. Like I've got a particular, I have, so you can hear the active ownership. I have a mindset that is setting me up for success, right? That's a 3.5 statement, right? I have a mindset that is setting me up for success. 4.0 is going to expand that. And as you pointed out, start seeing larger cultural forces that are shaping us. They are shaping us. It's shaping me. I'm had by it, but I can see that there's a system that's doing that. Now, 4.5, go ahead.
And that's where, like in a lot of the green theorists, Ibrahim X. Kendi, and the whole anti-racist idea is that because you and I are both had by the system, we have to fight actively against it all the time.
Right. Whereas
we have to throw elbows every breath, and if we're not throwing elbows every breath, then we're had by the system. Ergo, we're creating a racist subculture, whatever.
Right. Whereas someone like Carlos Hoyt, which I think is coming more from a 4.5 framing, is looking at saying, well, hold on a second. This whole thing of race is socially constructed. Do we want that? Do we want that lens? And we can start to see, 4.5 can start to see, okay, this particular lens is one of many lenses. And is it the best lens in terms of what it's going to produce in collectives? And so he proposes, he questions the very premise of the entire race conversation and tries to create a new context within which we can ask different questions and look at the whole thing in a different way. And what I see him doing is actively starting to manipulate the system in a positive way to try to get a different result in culture.
And what is 4.0 trying to do? They're not, they would certainly argue they're trying to impact the system.
Oh yeah, they are trying to impact the system.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's just, they're trying to impact the system from inside the reciprocal dynamic.
Okay.
So it's
maybe actually that's a great thing. Maybe from this idea of learning style, like let's talk about this with this example. Okay. Systemic racism is a thing. So we start at 3.0 and we end 4.5 in the subtle.
Mm-hmm.
So how is that held with that learning style?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll give a try.
Yeah. Put you on the spot a little bit there.
It's okay. It's okay. So firstly, 3.0 is emerging out of a concrete collective of rules and roles. So in our scenario here, we have to decide, well, what rules and roles are they stepping out of? Let's just make something up. They're in a traditional setting where maybe there is some black and white thinking, where people are categorized and described in sort of concrete ways. This person has this color skin, they act like this. This other person has this color skin, they act like that. So then 3.0, they are entering into a receptive state where they're beginning to receive impressions from a subtle mind that they don't quite understand yet. So here we can suppose that they will begin to be able to make a differentiation between what I think and where I grew up thinks. So there's an ability to do that, but at the same time, ideas can be coming in like rain. They can be streaming in like in a way that's hard to capture. So we may see a theory of race. We may not. We may see a questioning of the previous structure, which is a common thing that 3.0 is going to do.
Because it's receptive.
Because it's receptive.
And that's why in 3.0, we also see people really looking to experts, right?
That's right. That's right. So there also may be influence from when they go to college, and now all of a sudden they're getting in all this information about, maybe it's a postmodern.
From experts. Yeah.
From experts. And then the question is, do they create a new concrete collective of rules and roles around this? Does it spark their own ideas? Well, I don't agree with where I grew up. I agree with sort of what this teacher said, but not all of what they said. I think maybe I'm starting to come up with this idea. 3.5 is going to be able to get more active with it, right? So they're going to be clearer about who they are as a subtle individual, what they think, what they're feeling, how that's impacting the way that they're engaging in the world and how that impacts the world. But they still have a concrete collective. So their focus may still be on, can be on concrete features of someone's body, because when they look at a collective, they see a group of people. So they still could be unnecessarily categorizing people by race. Then 4.0 is going to see, well, actually, this is not just a bunch of individuals with mindsets.
It's collectives.
It's a collective context that we're all soaking in. And there's a recognition that, okay, there's this systemic racism is making us see, if you look at, the media and how the media portrays a person of color, and you look at the legal system and how all of these and the world of marketing and advertising, especially if we're looking, it's still there now, but it was even more prominent earlier on, where someone with darker skin was portrayed in a very negative way, especially men. They were portrayed in a very certain way that was on purpose. It was a marketing campaign. So 4.0 is going to be able to see that the whole culture is being influenced by this system that's giving us bias.
Right.
That's giving us racial bias.
Right. And then they can very easily lose the individuals and the collectives, right? All Black people are equally victims of racism, which is
that's right.
Maybe not.
Right. Yeah. And we start to see that for sure. And so there can be a lot of work to try to change the system from within it. But we're still had by it to a certain degree. So there's certain limitations, whereas 4.5, 4.5 has its own limitations, but 4.5 is going to be able to start looking at developmental structures within culture. That it's not just necessarily there's a whole system of racial oppression. Yes, we can acknowledge that. But we can also see that there are different stages of development that are seeing the world in different ways. And if those stages of development have power and then express shadow, then that's also going to bring forward other tones, other notes in culture. And so there can be a way that 4.5 can get more active with trying to meet every stage where it's at and also rectify the shadow to try to support a healthier collective.
Right. And that's the interpenetrative. That's
Ye-
the dot on the yin and yang, where I can acknowledge that, like, okay, I see a lot of the truth of what you're saying, but let's really unpack this and look at the nuance of it. I want to really I want to steel man your
Yeah.
argument. I want to both and your argument. I want to show where we're in agreement and where you can learn perhaps
Yeah.
that you might be doing unintentional harm by how you're holding things.
And then how do we go into schools, for example, and really support how children learn based on their developmental stages,
Right? Wouldn't that be something?
irregardless of the color of their skin, but recognizing the realities of how the system has impacted certain demographics,
Right.
but then coming in with a developmental lens and saying, okay, what's needed for developmental wellness for each group of children, and then creating a curriculum around that to
Right.
meet them as they grow. And